You're listening to Keys for Farewell. This is where one great question sparks a whole new conversation. I'm your host, Caitlin Green Johnson. I'm an apprentice funeral director and apprentice embalmer here at Anderson Funeral Home under the direction of our owner, Damon Hobbs. Today, we have a special treat on Keys for Farewell. I have one of my friends here. Lisa is with us, and she is the author of The Death Deck. You all know, you've heard me talk about the death deck and the end of life deck and the importance about having these conversations and optimally having them before a crisis hits. So, welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for doing this with me. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's amazing to be here with you today, Caitlin.
Tell me about the death deck. How'd you get started with this? This is one of my favorite tools. So, tell me how it came to be.
Sure. So the Death Deck was created in 2018. It was created by myself and my former business partner, Lori Lo Cicero. Lori was the wife to Joe. I was their hospice social worker. Joe lived with pancreatic cancer about a year, and then he came onto hospice for the last couple weeks of his life. And years later, Lori and I reconnected, and we discussed um, how much wasn't talked about before Joe died, and how, especially once he got the pancreatic cancer diagnosis, it became taboo to talk about the fact that he might die because he was really operating with this, you know, fight fighting a battle mentality, and he really thought he was going to beat pancreatic cancer. And so Lori was discussing how they had been really prepared on paper, but they had more preparation than many people in their 40s, which was how old he was when he died, but they hadn't had any conversations. So it was like there was life insurance, and there was an advance directive, and there was a living will, but she knew nothing about all of the preferences he might have as he was dying. And many people are dying. The dying process, especially if you're young, goes for a week, 2 weeks, and the person is usually unable to communicate during that time. It can be less, but usually if organs, the heart and lungs are strong, it does take a while for the body to shut down. And so it just brought up all these questions. And like many families that have, a younger person, there were small children, his parents, his siblings, their friends. And so it's a big, it's a house full of opinions, and nobody knew what Joe wanted. So Lori and I decided, let's create something to get people who wouldn't normally have these conversations to dip their toes in and just start talking about death. It's literally the only consistent thing. We know that people can cheat their way out of taxes, so that's not even like given, right?
That's exactly right.
But you can't cheat your way out of death. You just literally cannot. And so I think that it still remains both astounding and fascinating to me that death remains such a feared topic, such a avoided topic. And so all of our tools are meant to help increase conversations, decrease stigma, decrease uncomfortability. We used a lot of humor within the death deck to just try to lighten the topic up and remind people that death is part of life and humor is part of life. And I think the best way to take the sting out of things is to have a little laugh about it, So that was our intent.
I love it. I especially picked out what you said that they were prepared on paper, but paper doesn't always speak to how we feel about things or as we process things or answer our questions about what we don't know. This is both of us have a huge educational component. My prior time with hospice was a lot about education. You have option for
Mhm.
this, you have an option for that. You can do this, you
Mhm.
don't have to do that. How do you feel about this, that, or the other? And so that's what pulled me to the death deck. And I've used it for a while as a doula. And some of them are just hilarious. Some of them are things that we're all thinking that we don't really say out loud. And it kind of gives you that permission to snicker.
Uh-huh.
I kudos. I love this. I think this is the coolest thing.
You touched on something that is important, which is, I worked in hospice almost 20 years, and I worked in the emergency room for about 7 years. And in both of those settings, what I see over and over again is that the conversations are what people remember. The
Mm,
conversations are what give us confidence. The piece of paper may not even be found with instructions with the healthcare directive. We may not even know where that is when someone comes into the ER. But what people often do is they look back in their memory upon, conversations that were had about, I would never want to be in this situation, or,
Mhm.
statements about, like, my dad has told me that if we put a feeding tube in him, he would come haunt me. Right. And so, and I'm never going to forget that. And he shook his little finger at me and he was very stern. And I called my brother and said, "Hey, dad just said this. He said that sounds about right. Okay, let's hold on to that memory. This is an
Yeah.
important one, right?" So those are the moments we're trying to give people. So I just wanted to flesh out that piece about really the conversations are what give us confidence. And then the confidence is what helps us be able to make challenging emotional decisions,
Yes,
which
and have confidence in those decisions.
exactly.
If the time ever comes where you have to decide about a lifelong or a life-saving feeding tube, you will remember back to hear your father's words and you will be bolstered and have confidence. So, what he's
Hmm.
giving you is the gift of confidence, but what he's taking away is that uncertainty and that guilt and even the reassurance is what comes out of it. And I think that that's huge. So, any
Hmm.
conversation, you're exactly right that it's not necessarily what we do to people. You know, a lot of times in our healthcare system, it's about this procedure, this diagnosis, this checklist, this medicine, but it's a lot about what we talk through with people, what we do with them.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's crying at the bedside. Sometimes that's laughing when it's inappropriate.
Hmm.
Sometimes, breaking a little bit of silence with laughter or letting the silence happen
Hmm.
makes
Hmm.
for their experience. So
Hmm.
I really wanted to ask you because you are in sunny LA and I am on the other side of the country in Nashville. Do you think that where we are makes a difference in how taboo this conversation is?
Yes, I do, in lots of different ways. I grew up in Northern Michigan, but I grew up on a farm, and farmers talk about death. Death is part of agricultural, I mean, at least part of livestock farming. And so I really feel like death was much more normalized, and that my family had a pretty wicked, dark sense of humor about death that would probably really offend vegetarians, but that was how I was raised, right? But then, so there's cultural or there's some practical things within, the geographical location of where someone lives. But I've been traveling to quite a few conferences across the country in the last couple years. It tends to be the bigger cities, it tends to be the coasts that are more progressive and kind of pushing the envelope more and traditionally kind of leading the way, if you will, on advancements in all sorts of things and including death and dying. I think we have a huge network in LA of a death and dying collective and lots of people. And that is across I think that's growing across the country, but I think it does impact. I was at a conference in Alabama last year and you know, my cards were kind of like, you know, there was a oh, we were trying to laugh about death, or, oh, this feels, it felt very foreign to the Alabama group. There was also, to be honest, a lot of conversation about religion and God that I don't hear in my day-to-day life. And so I think the lens at which we're looking at death is different depending on our cultural and religious backgrounds. And so I think is that there might be less irreverence and more of a conservative respect
Mhm.
portion. But at the end of the day, when people experience the death of someone that they really care about, I think, there's so much universal about that. And I think that it does open us up after a death to begin thinking about our own mortality. And it does often help us to think about preparing ahead when we have to deal with someone's estate. And I think we can access that anywhere. And what I love is all the doulas popping up across the country in all sorts of communities who are really helping people take advantage of that moment when they might have more openness to explore the topic and get prepared.
Could not agree more. I've focused my career really on education and continuing credits for professionals about the
Oh.
jargon that we use, the professional words that we use. And I agree with you that openness does not equal irreverent.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's hard because openness is vulnerable.
Mhm.
And of course, you know, I was raised very and there is a more formal consciousness of loss and grief. There's more ritual. There's more, well, I wouldn't say more, maybe just different. But the way that we say things matters. I like to think that openness does not mean irreverent. But I
Mhm.
will say that I think the reason for that is because most of our media is very irreverent. It is just incorrect. You know, we
Mhm.
laugh, but we have people that are watching Walking Dead. That's their
Mhm.
relationship with death. That's the images that they see. That's not
Mhm.
accurate. You watch something about attorneys, and that's how we learn what the court system might be like if you've never been
Mhm.
there. So we
Mhm.
have all these ideas from the media, and we have all these ideas from our own perspectives. You know, that most funeral directors are in the business either because they had a really good experience and they wanted to be able to help the community, or they had a really bad experience and they wanted to help the community. And I
Mhm.
think that our average community member is the same way. It may
Mhm.
not be that talking about death is what's scary. It may be that their experience and what they've been through was traumatic. So,
Mhm.
walking alongside people through these conversations, I would much rather do this before it's a crisis. I wanna have these
Mhm.
conversations around the supper table. I wanna have these conversations when people are thinking about Medicare or retirement. I wanna have these conversations before cancer treatments. I wanna have these conversations as part of, you know, daily life. And
Mhm.
what's often said at the funeral or at the deathbed during a hospice vigil should be
Mhm.
said at a birthday party or should have been said at a Sunday dinner. And so that's kind of where my perspective has been, and one of the reasons that I love these kind of icebreakers and conversation starters. So
Mhm.
let's do a game. Throw me a question from the death deck and let's see how I do.
Well, luckily, there's no wrong answer, so you're gonna do great.
Says you.
I really appreciate what you said. I think it's life is all about, in my opinion, being open to new experiences and learning from other people and being curious. I find it beautiful and poignant how the traditional respectful funeral home can be. And I think that there is such I liked your comment about that in the South there may be more rituals around. And I think one of the things that I struggle with working here in California and hospice is that the majority the vast majority of people are choosing direct cremation and they have no plans for a service. And for me, that just keeps breaking my heart because I know that grief belongs in community and we're missing something with that. So I just wanted to circle back because I certainly don't view California as doing it right. I think there's just cultural differences in how we approach things, but I have a lot of respect for what the funeral homes and the traditional ritual and comfort that that can bring.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, and not just California. You know, nationwide, some of the last numbers I've seen that it's over 60% are direct cremations. And of course, you can have cremation with a memorial service, with a butterfly release, with a whatever. But my question is, what type of coping or what type of processing comes with direct, no contact cremation?
Mhm,
And there are people that sincerely want that and that it works for them and it's fine. But there
mhm,
are a lot of people that are unprepared or maybe they just don't know or they're not really educated on the options. They pick that and then they're stuck in this grief or this guilt or they just didn't know what else to do. And I see us kind of coming back to our roots where we have even maybe a church service or a prayer vigil or just a family get together. Think of it like a
mhm,
family reunion in honor of this loved one. So
mhm,
anything that you personalize like that helps you walk through it. I don't like the word closure. I think that that's
mhm,
a myth. I don't think you ever get
mhm,
over it. I don't think it ever ends, but you do have to
mhm,
cope and you do have to process it somehow. And
mhm,
so I've heard a lot of feedback about direct cremation and then they say, did it really happen? Feels like
mhm,
a bad dream. Did that really
mhm.
happen? I feel like I just missed something. That parallels for me what I hear about people when they miss a funeral. Like if they were in the hospital having surgery and they miss someone's death and funeral, burial, whatever it was, and then they get out of the hospital, and how do you adjust to that? It's like, did that just happen? This seems like a bad dream. So I think
Mhm,
you're
mhm,
right, and I think that's nationwide. I think we're gonna start seeing maybe a hybrid type of cremation with or
mhm,
even a return to traditional or home or natural burial. I don't know.
mhm,
We'll see, but whatever it is, as long as it's thoughtful and meaningful, I'm
mhm.
in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we need because what happens often is that, I'll make calls to the bereaved and it's been 4 months and I'm checking in and asking them, how things are going and often what they'll say is, we still haven't done anything for mom.
Mhm.
And, we keep talking about it, but like we don't even know what to do or where to start and so, you know, it's the fact that you can do direct cremation so cheaply, I think is important for access. However, for many people, they need someone to help them plan. They need a structure. For other people, and that could be a celebrant, that could be a doula, that could be a funeral director, that could be a funeral home and all of their staff. There's lots of ways to go about that, but it's overwhelming for family members and they tend to have
Oh, it
different
is.
feelings.
And it's a lot of detail.
Yeah, and I mean it's really it's lovely the idea that we can be super creative, but if you get rid of the entire structure, then you're having to like really come up with all the details and when you are grieving, that's really hard to do. It's just
Yeah,
really hard to do.
it
So it
is. You're
just gets put off.
exhausted.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think there's nothing wrong with doing it after the fact. If you
Mhm.
feel that lingering, just something missing, let's do something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've experienced where people have done direct cremation and then they feel like the circle's not closed, like there's just something missing, like I didn't do
Mhm.
anything or I didn't say anything or it just doesn't feel right. And
Mhm.
so I've loved helping people put together something meaningful for that. I've even had people that have used other funeral homes or other cremation services, and they said, we thought we wanted direct, but it was just very cold and impersonal. They were
Mhm.
less responsive. Or part
Mhm.
of that is because the general public is not educated on that's what direct cremation is. It's not a contact service, it's not a handhold walk you through it, it's not guidance. But there are providers that could say, do you know about? Have you thought about? Small
Mhm.
things with great attention. That's one of
Mhm.
the things I love about being in a funeral home is that not everybody wants a service, but they might want something in the middle. We can do
Right.
that right here. Not
Uh-huh.
everybody wants the full flowers, regalia, pomp and circumstance. That's fine. Some people do. It's fine.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I've had memorials here where we play rock music or classical music. I've had flowers that were all in purple, which was
Mm.
beautiful because that was our favorite color. We've
Mhm.
had a service that it was all wildflowers. Anything like that, I think is so, so awesome. So when you say you're seeing that there, we're seeing it here too. I think this is a
Mm.
human thing, not a California thing.
Okay, that's good to know. Obviously, we could talk on this topic for a very long time, but I will pull a couple questions here for us to talk about. So,
Okay.
I this one, speaking of potentially differences based on geography, this card actually came from an experience that I had. And it says, visiting a loved one at the cemetery, you see a family barbecuing and watching TV at a nearby gravesite. Your reaction: A, immediately complain to management. B, cringe, but let it be. C, jealousy, wishing my family embraced death like
I'm gonna say it depends.
that. Okay.
It depends. Um it depends on the person, the decedent. I think it also depends on the cemetery. There
Mm-hmm.
are many cemeteries that would be wildly inappropriate and I would cringe. But then there are others that are like memorial parks that
Mm-hmm.
have family areas. I don't know that I've seen a barbecue. There are people that need to go to the cemetery to walk through their grief. And sometimes their grief is so complicated and so traumatic that they go and sit every day. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very common to see somebody in a lawn chair reading a book And so I think that that's a very sacred, reverent time, and to disrupt them, I think would be very inappropriate. There's
Mhm.
also, in this area, there are a lot of memorials and gravesides and prayer vigils that are held at the cemetery. So if I thought for a minute that somebody barbecuing and watching television on this side would disrupt someone at a service or a candlelight, it would become inappropriate. In history, humans have the same kind of want to be present, include that person. That reminds me of Mexican Day of the Dead,
Mhm.
De la
Mhm.
Muerta. I love the fact that they go back to the grave, honor the person, flowers, regalia, and that's very respectful. That's
Mhm.
appropriate in their culture, and it's beautiful, but they don't do it at the expense of someone else.
That everyone
Yeah.
is embarking and bringing food and bringing, gifts to.
You know, in America, at one time, Memorial Day was the day to dress and come to the graveyard, do the flowers, have an honorary service or memorial, and that
Mhm.
was very, very well kept. Today, we have wreath layings and things like that for special occasions.
What I like thinking about is how do we continue to include the people we've lost in our lives?
Mhm.
And so we can do that in a very tactile, literal way of going to the cemetery, or we can do that in cooking their favorite recipes, wearing their clothing, talking to them throughout the day, writing about them, sharing piece of our person and keeping that connection alive. So
My
this
favorite
is
are
just
the
one way.
pillows or the teddy bears. Have you seen the teddy bears made out of dad or grandfather's shirt? I
The comfort
love that.
bears,
Or the
yes.
pillow, anything with the buttons, anything like that, I just melt for.
I know I have a quilt of my one of my friends, some of her T-shirts that
Oh,
my another friend made for me that I just love. And, I had kept her T-shirt in a Ziploc and it kept her scent. And I would just like open the Ziploc and smell her and then close it real quick to try to
yeah.
preserve the scent as long as possible.
You know what? You just
Yeah.
captured this whole conversation in that story because we
Yeah.
all do that. We all do
Mhm.
that, and then after we get done, we think, "Oh, I'm so weird." We're not gonna tell anybody that we do that. But yes, I remember, um, like grandfather's handkerchief. I was like, "Man, when this doesn't smell like him anymore, I will
Mm,
have lost him for sure." Kinda thing.
mm.
We all go through that. So, one of the things I love about the death deck is the options for answers. Let me tell you my favorite one. I'll let you answer this
Okay.
one. I'm surprise you. A loved one suggests that jewelry be made containing their cremated remains. Would you wear it? Here's A, B, and C. This is the best. Here, I'll show you the card. A, sure, I'd love to wear my loved one. This is probably most people. B, I'd gladly accept it, but then I'd tuck it safely away in a drawer. C, yuck. Our memories are treasure enough for me. No way. I think that's hilarious because it captures some of our human reactions. You know, I have
Mhm.
clients that love a fingerprint, maybe a
Mm,
necklace or charm. I love that idea. Others have things that they keep cremated remains in, with a paperweight or a
mhm.
sandstone or a necklace, or you can do all kinds of things, but the reactions are very telling. So, what do you think?
It's so funny, Caitlin, because I had actually chose that card as one to ask you.
That's one of my favorite cards in the deck. I love that you had it too.
I would love to wear my loved one. My grandparent behind me, and I've considered doing something, but I think I will probably hold off for a parent. But this just because we're talking about ashes, my friend Ian does ash portraits. And so he draws with cremated remains. And he's done these gorgeous portraits, big portraits of the deceased person. And it's this whole grief. They go through like a journal with him. He's this beautiful, loving soul. And there's just so many ways I understand people who this just is too far and it doesn't align with them, right? But for me, I think the people that I've lost, I just want them close to me,
Mhm,
and I think I get excited by all of these different ways that people are trying to support grievers, you know,
mhm.
And I think that the more options we have and the more that you and I and other people listening in now know about some of these things. Yeah, yeah, and we could anything to me that is helpful in grief is worth at least knowing about, to see if that aligns with something that fits your grief and that person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I heard something from a mentor of mine that I think applies really liberally here. It's not really a question of right or wrong, it's a question of dignified and respectful. That's it. If it's
Mhm.
dignified and respectful, then it's a personal choice. I had a girl say, "Can you make me into a diamond?" I was like, "Absolutely. It's expensive." Here's the key. Say their name,
Mhm.
keep their memory alive, adjust to your new life, and remember them in it. So
Mhm.
often for us as professionals, we're the safe space to talk about that. I was there at the death or I was there at the funeral. They may not be able to
Mhm.
talk to their girlfriends or even their other family members about what they saw, what they smelled, what they thought,
Mhm.
how it went. And
Mhm.
so I can be that weird friend to say, "Yeah, yeah, tell the story, tell me. What do you think
Mhm.
about? Well, have you thought about maybe a fingerprint? Have you thought about
Mhm.
maybe a photo?" I
Mhm.
had another doula, one of my really good friends, that she does a lot of legacy projects as she's caring for people. So, memory care, for example, or caregiving hourly. She does a lot of legacy projects. And there was this very sweet lady that all of us loved. I think everybody in the county loved this lady. She was very, very put together and classy and gracious, and she always had perfect lipstick. Even when she got sick and even when her memory started to decline, she had perfect lipstick. And my girlfriend, the doula that was caring for her, had this idea for them to do lipstick like they did every couple of hours, and then they did a blot on a canvas. And she had the lady write a message on that canvas. The lady had, daughters and granddaughters, and so, nothing was ever said about it. She kept them, but at the funeral, she presented the daughter and the granddaughters. One of them said, "Mimi loves you." One of them said, "God is within her, she will not fail." One of them said, Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman. One of them said, "I can do all things." And it had these lipstick prints, Mimi's lipstick prints on this canvas, and, it dawned on me that that is a very inexpensive way to show great love, and I always give kudos to that doula because small things with great attention, she made a big, big impact in that grief continuum for that whole family.
Oh my gosh, they must have been bawling when they got that.
Uh, well, she set it up at the funeral home, and so when the family came first and they walked in, they were like, "Mimi's lipstick," and they all started laughing. And it became like this family joke, and they just hugged that
Oh,
canvas, and I just thought, "You know what? Small things with great attention."
that is so beautiful.
That's one of my favorites. I love buttons, I love mason jars, I love anything, grandfather's dress shirts, grandfather's ties, anything like
Yeah.
that that shows meaning. I've seen it
Mm,
built on
mhm,
every church pew,
mhm.
or you name it, just to make it very personal, and that is
Yeah.
just so precious, and I think that we're blessed to be able to do that with people.
I love that. I love that. I've been to a funeral where the woman collected little I forget the name of what they're called, but they're like little Christmas scenes, and it's this whole line of ceramic-y things
Yeah,
that
like the little villages.
and so she had hundreds. And so they brought them it was at a funeral home, and they brought them to the funeral home, and her spouse asked everyone to take one home and to put it up, every Christmas and remember her. And I've seen that happen with books, book
Mhm.
lovers who the family brings all their books and it's a way to help the family who doesn't want to keep all of these things that are collected, but it's more so for the grievers to
Mhm.
each have a little piece of them, a little something that was owned by the person that was special to them that then and you said one other thing that I think that made me think of one other quick thing. I really believe that people have to be comfortable with death to really be a good support for someone that's grieving. When you mentioned how sometimes friends don't know how to respond when you're talking about like how the person died, I've heard so many stories from people who are trying to work through. There's so much second guessing and grief. There's so much processing. There can be a trauma depending on how the death went. There's certainly memories and conflicting memories and trying to make sense of what happened. And if you're really uncomfortable, which that could be because of trauma that you've had. And so I'm not saying that this is anyone's fault, but if you're uncomfortable with talking about death and dying, it is really hard, just someone that's in grief. And which, people share with me that they're surprised at who has shown up and who hasn't, as they're grieving. And so I think it's just another way that we can improve death, dying, and grief experiences is if we get a little more comfortable with the topic so that we can support the people that we love. And
Sure.
and the death deck, it is one of many tools to try to help people get a little more comfortable, a little more prepared.
I can't remember if it was a poster or a meme or I don't know. I saw it somewhere and it just shocked me. But it said, "What's the worst thing you can say to somebody that's grieving?" And the answer was nothing. The worst thing you can do is say nothing. You don't have to have the right
Mhm.
words. Your presence communicates your care. Your presence, maybe even a bottle of water, says a lot.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I One of our death deck questions does ask what's the worst thing, and it has options, right? And it always gets the conversation going of grievers sharing some of the things people have said to them. But you are exactly right. Most people feel like I will take those platitudes that don't comfort me over not saying anything, which feels like abandoning me. And so, yeah, I get a little worried that sometimes we might be leaning too far into what not to say to people in grief because I think it can make people so worried of saying something wrong that they don't say anything or show up. And so I really like that.
We could do this for eons. In fact, let's do it again sometime. But thank you so much for coming on today. You guys, you should Google the Death Deck. I've got one, I've used it for years, but just follow her. She is amazing. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Caitlin. It was such a joy to be here.
Thanks so much for being here today. Be sure to tune in next time to Keys to Farewell. Anderson Funeral Home is Gallatin's family-owned and operated funeral service. We're located here in Gallatin, just off the square, and we're humbled by the opportunity to serve your family.